Welcome to episode 103 of the Ceres podcast. I'm your host, Stelios, and the founder and director of Ceres Pure Food Innovation. Just a quick Ceres online store update. We've recently updated our label offering. We have 2 new labels for closing clamshell packaging and one for actually just, the bags or flat boxes, you name it. One is called Fried to Perfection. Really nice, green and black. You can use it to seal the packaging. It just looks really good. The other is I am gluten-free. We've updated that label somewhat. Another great sort of label to break the packaging. Yeah, they're both sort of fresh looking and fun. The way I sort of see these sort of sealing labels is like just an analogy as such, is that it's the customers to open, So if you give someone a fried egg, you want to be the one to break it, really. It's theirs, it's on their plate. And the seal for the packaging, it just helps people make it feel like it's theirs. They open it, it's not been tampered with. It's just nice and easy. You put it on the bags, put it on the packaging, dead easy. Like I said, they both look really cool. And then also we've got our I Love Fish and Chip label. It's a nice square label, reminiscent of like the I Love New York, I Love London ones. They're just, again, quite fun. It's a bit of branding. It seals the large paper bag, so it's just branding for the packaging. So yeah, they're all value for money. But like I said, they all give a sense of sealing, so it feels secure. So when something's been delivered, it just helps people open that bag with confidence, especially when it's a third party delivering. So, if you want to order those, just visit worldofceres.com/shop and off you go. As you may have noticed, we've started adding these little adverts at the beginning of the podcast. We will never insert ads in the middle to break the conversation. We hope that's cool. It gives a chance for us to highlight and support what we do, but also gives the opportunity to our supporters to highlight what they do. So, as I mentioned in the last episode, we will be making some tweaks to the podcast. We won't be pointing them out as we go along. It's going to be a very gradual phase, and hopefully, it goes well. If you do have any feedback, send it over to me by email to Stelios, Stelios, @worldofceres.com. Okay, here it goes. Not all gluten-free batters are made the same. That's a fact. Did you know that gluten actually has a technical use in batter? It helps stabilize the carbon dioxide in the liquid, which helps give you a really crispy batter time after time. If the CO2 or carbon dioxide stays in the product, then you're going to get a perfectly aerated batter. If it goes to the top and dissipates, well, what was the point? You're just going to get a very flat, dense, not a nice product. So if you want to put a gluten-free option on the menu, then look no further. Used by some of the best operators in the business. This isn't a race to the bottom when it comes to price and ingredients. Like everything we do at Ceres, our goal is to give you consistency. We love the Ceres gluten-free batter, and yes, I know, I'm biased, but I love it because it's crisp and well-seasoned. You can have confidence in the batter as it contains no artificial colourings, no artificial flavourings, and it's completely allergen-free. So, get your Ceres gluten-free batter from worldofceres.com or your wholesaler. If you don't know who your wholesaler is, get in touch with me and we'll let you know. The Ceres podcast has been brought to you in conjunction with Bizimply. Are you fed up of managing the complexity of staff rotas, juggling 10, 20, 30 staff, increased labour costs? Are you worried about not keeping up with HR? I know firsthand how hard it was managing staff. I remember how stressful it was doing the rotas, managing the HR and so on. You could argue that it's probably more stressful today also with all the other complexities. In some ways, managing the rotas was difficult, but HR has just become that big headache in this day and age. So you don't have to struggle no more. Bizimply is the all-in-one operations, HR, rota and workforce management software designed and run by hospitality experts to make every shift run like clockwork. Bizimply offers you drag-and-drop solution, no more stress. There is also a time station app to prevent time theft and buddy punching. The MyZimply app gives you live time and attendance tracking, but also tells you their colleagues, their shift and roles on a given day. Bizimply has so many key features. I think my favourite is the fact that it integrates with the accountancy software like Xero and so on. I just like all of my software just talking to each other. It just means less human interaction. If it's one mistake, it's one at the beginning somewhere, at the beginning of the process, rather than lots of human error constantly. So stop stressing about. Visit bizimply.com today, book in a free demo and off you go. Like I said, bizimply.com. Today's podcast guest is Ken Hom. Ken is one of the world's leading experts on authentic Chinese and Asian cooking. Not only is he really passionate about using high quality ingredients, but also highly effective cookware and accessories to help give every stir fry flavour, and been developing his own range to meet those needs since 1986. Amongst his many accolades, Ken has been appointed a Great Britain campaign ambassador and has been awarded Officer of the Order of a Great British Empire, OBE, by Queen Elizabeth II for services to the culinary arts in 2009. With over 8 million woks sold worldwide and with 1 in 7 Britons owning a Ken Hom wok, he's also had and continues to have a great impact on the UK economy. I even bought one of his excellent woks when I moved into my old house, and I still have one 10, 11 years on in my new house. I just need to get myself a nice cleaver now. Ken Hom has written over 36 books, translated in 16 languages, with a total of 80 books published worldwide, all in translated editions. He's presented a further 5 television series: Hot Chefs, Ken Hom's Hot Wok, Ken Hom's Foolproof Chinese Cookery. And I've got loads of his books. I've read, there's something about these books, they just make it really easy. I'm not Asian, and yet he makes it really easy for me to understand. And that's why I love what Ken Hom does, because he's made Chinese and Asian food really accessible. I really enjoyed his book, My Stir-Fried Life. It was funny. It was just like he was telling it to us, really. Like you're reading it and it's like in his voice, and just a great life, hard worker, absolute grafter, absolute gentleman. Anyway, you've heard enough of me. So I really hope you enjoy this episode with Ken Hom. Ken, welcome to the Sarah's podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
I know you're really busy. You're a few hours ahead of us. So, we'll get this done so you can go put your feet up, have a nice weekend.
No, I have my aperitif.
That's what I like to hear. I heard that you like yourself some Japanese whiskey.
Oh my God. This thing is going around. People think I'm an alcoholic.
Everyone's allowed to drink, you know what I mean? Yeah. So you did have me laughing this morning, actually, because I was reading your book, My Stir-Fried Life, and I was reading about you and Sue on your travels.
Oh, yes.
It was just funny how you're really enjoying food and you're going to nice restaurants and you want the nicest food you could possibly get, and she's just like, steak and chips.
Yeah. But because she grew up in Southpool, so she has very sort of British taste. So if I said, we have something with truffle, she goes, oh, I don't want that. I remember, you of course know the famous Sir Alex Ferguson, who loves good food. He loves truffles. He loves good wine. And when I bought him some truffles, Sue said, can I have mine without that, please? But you know what? It's really nice to have people like that, because it brings you sort of down to earth, so that you don't think everybody is a foodie, that they know about all these kinds of things. And I mean, what people really care about is, I think, something is good. But for instance, I'm a huge fan of fish and chips, but I think fish and chips have to be made right. In other words, I don't like it super greasy. I think the batter is very, very important. I don't want the fish dry. And I'm such a pain, because I like my chips not soggy, but very crispy. And I like the bits.
Very crispy on the outside, fluffy on the inside, I guess.
Exactly.
For me, I'm exactly like you, because I make batter and I hate it when you go into a fish and chip restaurant or takeaway and it's soft. There's no excuse for it. I went to a shop near Liverpool and I said to the woman, oh, where's your frying range? And she goes, I haven't got a frying range. I was like, well, how do you cook fish and chips? She goes, come with me. And we walk in the back and she had a Chinese cooker.
Okay.
In a wok. And I said to her, oh, that explains why your fish is always crispy.
Because if you're cooking at those sort of temperatures, it's not efficient in my view. But if you're cooking at those sort of temperatures, you're not going to have a problem with greasy fish. You know.
You know what? I think it's always fascinating to me, the thing about cooking. For instance, frying, how you can, if you do it right at the right temperature, and you know you're an expert as well, and you get the batter right. In other words, I was always fascinated when I went to Japan and you have these, they're making tempura right in front of you. And it's so light and ethereal. I mean, you would never know that it's been in oil. And they get it really hot and they cook it for you. And also, a clean oil is very important. And as you know, the type of oil is all very important. I find, for instance, when I make fish and chips, I use groundnut oil.
I was just thinking of that.
I find it works really fantastic. I know that suet is very good, but it's not healthy. I don't eat a lot of meat, so I don't have suet hanging around.
I think for us, so if you're looking at groundnut's a great product. It's a lot of fish and chip shops I know use groundnut, but also beef dripping, for argument's sake.
Yes.
It was very popular, not so much now. But there is an argument to say that it is healthy because in fish and chip shops where they have repeated use, that oil stays stable for longer. Whereas groundnut or a liquid oil probably wouldn't last as long. And then that would degrade, which means it would be unhealthier. So, but yeah, I think the Japanese, they take it to that artistic level. It's perfection, and I think when I see the frying they do and, the tempuras and the starches, they're just very focused and, they don't do anything unless it's perfect.
And I learned from a Japanese chef how they do the batter. For instance, the chef told me that he said, don't mix it too well. In other words, it's contrary to what you would think. They said it should be lumpy. Also, what was fascinating in Japan was how they use cold water and ice cubes in the batter. And I thought, I've never seen that before. And you know how you learn something every day is the chemistry of how the batter works with the cold, and it's fascinating.
From our point of view, the cold water stops the gluten from forming. That's another reason why the Japanese don't like mixing it too much, because the gluten forms and you get like a bit, it's almost like elastic, and they don't like that because then that lets oil in. And again, it just shows how dedicated they are to their craft, because they leave the lumps, because the lumps do two things. It keeps the batter liquid at a nice thickness, but it also, when it hits the hot oil, it blows up and goes crispy.
Do you know where they got that from? The tempura?
No.
You won't believe it. They got it from the Portuguese. Because it was called the Portuguese, which, I worked in Brazil a lot, and they called it tempera. And boy, it's heavy, leaden, and so oily. And I think what you said about the Japanese is right. They work on things like amazing until they perfect it. They're obsessed with perfection. And it's so different from the tempera of the Portuguese.
It's just their culture. It's so obsessive. For example, I read an article a few weeks ago about a chap in Japan they've just got a grilled mackerel restaurant. Nothing else, just grilled mackerel. And he spent 4 years just learning how to cut it. He wasn't even allowed to cook it, And then he said that's 8 years of training just to learn how to then cook it on the barbecue. And I thought to myself, wow, that's like the longest apprenticeship ever. The guy's 40. So, I'm thinking to myself, he's probably not, when he's 50, he's not even going to be a master then. Like, but it is that the way that they dedicate themselves to that approach is just, I don't know, like it's refreshing. I can imagine it's pretty stressful if you're in that environment, but
I know. Well, my chef friend, Pierre Hermé, who is one of the top pastry chefs in the world, and he's in Paris, and he says, when I get like Japanese students, they just work night and day. They just want, and sometimes they make it better than I do. And it's funny. I found that too. Sometimes working with like Thai chefs when I was first cooking here in Bangkok with the Oriental Hotel. And I would say, that's fantastic. And they say, Chef, it's your recipe. I said, really? It's better than how I would make it.
Do you think there's something about the Asian work ethic that really produces this perfection? Because I've seen it, when I've been on the Saga cruise ships training them how to use batter. The Philippines, the Filipinos are all around me. They're writing notes. They're really obsessed about it. And you've just said it. We've said it about the Japanese, the Thai. Is it something about that work ethic that they just want to be the best?
Well, I think it's everywhere that I've cooked, especially in Asia. For instance, when I cooked in Hong Kong, the Asian chefs are just, because they think, because you're the chef and they have this deep respect for you and they want to learn and they're eager to absorb and they want to make you happy, which is pretty nice. And so they want to do their best. I remember when I was doing all the food for Cathay Pacific, the airline, and going, especially in Asia, to Indonesia, all these places in Taiwan, etc., and like you said, in the Philippines. And the dedication of these young chefs was mind-boggling. And it was humbling. And actually, it helped me because it made me explain things more. They said, like, chef, they want to know, why do you do it this way? It's not the kind of, like in the West, the French chef will say, you do this, period. They don't explain why. It's as if they don't want you really to know.
Yeah.
And in Asia, they don't shout at you. They treat you like a teacher. And they said, we're doing this. And they explain why we do this, if you have questions about it. In other words, I want you to understand it. I want you to get it like I do. In other words, I'm a teacher sharing things with my student, that sort of relationship. And you find that everywhere throughout Asia.
Yeah, that's really important, especially if you want to cultivate that quest of learning and perfection, let's say, or reverence as well. Because if you're just shouting at people, how far is that going to go?
Yeah, exactly. And I always thought of myself as a teacher more than anything, and that's really what I love to do. It's about sharing. So it makes me even more eager to explain myself. And it's funny because when you have to explain to someone, it makes it clearer in your own mind as well. You thought, it helps. It has helped me to write books, for example. I learned that when you write things, you want people to achieve the same success that you have. That's what sells a book. If they make it.
I've had my head in your book since we approved this, and there's this ease and comfort in the way that the information is being delivered to me, and especially with cookbooks, especially with Chinese food, it is inherently hard to someone who's not Chinese because you're talking about lots of different ingredients, and
Yes.
I wouldn't have them in my larder, although we do have certain things in our larder. But for many people, they wouldn't have Shaoxing wine, they wouldn't have all these things. So but the way you explain it it's very easy for people to understand.
Well, I think that's because I want people to understand and to make it. And actually, that is when somebody says, what do you think is your greatest achievement? Well, I think the greatest achievement is to bring people to a different world that they don't know, they haven't experienced, and for them to understand it. Because I think the more we share about food and culture, the more we learn. And I think it's going to make a better world. God knows we're actually one world. And this whole thing about, as you know, your company is very interested in things that are ethical, and which I think is so important because we're of one planet and we must share things with each other. And it's so nice when I learn a food that's not mine. I thought, I didn't know that. And to taste something different is to taste someone's history, to taste someone's culture. How wonderful is that? It's like being transported. It's sort of like Star Trek, but more fun. You're being transported to another world.
So true. If we were to go to a restaurant together and I took you to a Greek restaurant, I'm passing on that culture to you, and the same vice versa. And it's more than just food. All right, it is good food, but it then becomes about two people sharing food and talking about their culture and their history and so on.
Well, this is what I think migration and immigration is important because, like your family, my family, what we brought over to countries that are not our country was that we brought our food and it enriches the culture. I mean, how fantastic that you can get wonderful Greek food in the UK. You can get good Chinese food. I mean, it's fantastic. You don't have a monoculture. You have a diverse, multicultural thing that you can say, what are we going to have tonight? How fantastic.
If you spend longer than 5 minutes on Twitter, you'd think that England is the most racist, closed off country in the whole world. And yet you forget that you can walk down the street and you walk past, and this isn't even London, is where I am. You
Yes.
walk past a Turkish restaurant, a Greek restaurant, an Indian restaurant, a Chinese restaurant. And you think, well, because everyone's come over here and brought their culture with them. And what is it immigrants do best, actually? They get into the society and they actually start cooking food. And my parents, well, my granddad came over in the UK in the 1950s and he went straight into like cafes and diners. And then my parents went into fish and chips. And that story won't be so different to everyone who's come from somewhere. If you're Indian, you went into an Indian restaurant, all fish and chips. And Chinese, again, it would be Chinese restaurants, all fish and chips. I think that was always been on the border. Fish and chips has always been the other option.
It's funny, I was asked by a magazine what, the top 5 cities I thought were really interesting. And I put, for example, just London, I mean, as a world city. You can go to London and have almost every food on the planet without ever stepping outside of London. And I think that's fantastic. And see, where you are, you're not even in London, and yet you go to places like, remember Manchester, how diverse it was. I mean, you can live in Manchester and just eat your way through all that food. It's fantastic.
Liverpool's the same. I went to Liverpool
Yes.
and about 3 years ago with a friend, and I was shocked because I've never actually spent that much time in Liverpool. And my eyes we were walking around, and the amount of culture that's oozing out of Liverpool is amazing. And I think before that, I just made the same old jokes about Liverpool, like everyone said. But to actually be there and soak it in, and we sat outside, and yeah, it was a real nice day, and you're just walking around. But immigration. I'm really interested in immigration. It's something that, we've just discussed the benefits of immigration, but it also has its challenges. And one of the big challenges that is going to happen and has been happening is that, if you consider after World War II, Chinese immigration sort of rose exponentially in the UK, and it was really good for the economy. But all of the people that came over and did something, let's say they did restaurants, first and second generation, they then said, no, I don't want my kids to do this. So those kids then go and become educated or business people or just do something different. And now we're in a place in let's say the 2020s, where it's harder to find people to work these restaurants, and it's harder to then bring them over from China and Hong Kong because of immigration being tightened up. How do you see the future of the sort of Chinatowns, let's say, in the UK?
Well, it's going to be tough because, as you said, the younger generation, for instance, I remember growing up, I would never want to have a restaurant. Are you joking? I worked in a restaurant when I was young, from 11 to I was 16. And I said, I wouldn't want to wish it on my worst enemy. It's really hard work. No weekends off. You can't go clubbing with your friends. What is that all about? And I don't think people really understand that the hospitality business is a really tough business. And by closing off the spigot to immigrants to come and work in the UK, the hospitality business has a big, big problem. I mean, I know many people in the UK hospitality business, and they said they find it hard to find people to work. And it's because a lot of younger people, I mean, they don't want to work those long hours. They want to have fun. They want to go drinking at the pub. They want to relax and everything. They don't want to be sweating, and kitchens are not that glamorous. And all this thing about people wanting to be chefs. I said, you kidding me? You're masochist? It's hard work. It's really hard work.
A lot of people want to be chefs because they see, especially recently, the Gordon Ramsay, the Jamie Olivers, they see all of that and they think, oh, look, they're on TV and they've got loads of followers on Instagram or whatever, or Twitter. What they don't see is all the hours that were slaved in the kitchen before all of that,
Absolutely. Exactly.
There is a huge divide at the moment where I think people are going into hospitality and then thinking, well, I want to do 40 hours a week and I don't want to work weekends because I do want to go clubbing. And you can't have both of those things because hospitality, you do have to, unfortunately, work the unhospitable hours for others to enjoy the hospitable hours.
Exactly. But that's how you learn about cooking, is by doing it, like a lot of it. In other words, you can't just make some fish just because you like it. You have to be doing it, 50 hours a week, and then you get good at it. It's that time that is constant practice. The hospitality business, it's about doing it often. Those who are successful have been doing it for a long, long time. And I know they're good because, as you said, we see their stardom, but we don't see all the work that went behind it. I mean, I remember when I first met Gordon many years ago when he was at Aubergine. He said, God, this is bloody hard work. I said, yes, it is. And you got to do it because that's the only way that somebody can run a kitchen. You have to keep your eye on the ball. You have to watch your food costs. You have to watch things constantly to make sure it's consistent. That's how you have a Michelin star restaurant, and it's got to be good. You have to be thinking about new ideas all the time. It's working. That's constantly. It's people see only the glamorous side.
Yeah.
You get the side that has glamorized being a chef, but I think people don't see the work behind it. I remember meeting Jamie Oliver when he was in the kitchen. He was just this young lad working at the River Cafe, and I remember him, this young guy. He was just so eager, but he worked really hard. He had to.
Yeah.
It's not that glamorous.
No, it's not at all. Because it's a hard job. It's a real hard job.
But you know what? It's rewarding. I tell you why. Let's look on the other side. It's a hard job, but if you're good at it and you're successful financially, it can be really good. If you know how to manage things, you have to be a good business person too, I think.
Yeah.
Because you got to watch your food costs. At the same time, you have to keep the quality of what you're buying. And you have to know what's going on. You have to know the new trends. But at the same time, you have to stick to your guns about what you know. People try to be like other chefs. I said, you have to follow your own instinct about, I think, cooking. That's what makes a successful restaurant, is that you cook what you like to eat. And you hope that what you like to eat is good. And if it's good, the success follows.
No, definitely. What do you think, in your experience, what have you seen in English Chinese restaurants on the menu that just doesn't exist in China?
Well, it exists in China, but in a different form. Like the crispy duck, how they serve it in the UK is really unique because Chinese are very smart business people. They figured out what sells in the UK. Crispy. Anything crispy sells. You fry it and it sells. People like crispy. Okay. And what is it that they have that we can make in advance? Because the prep is very important. In other words, if it takes a lot of time to cook it and everything, well, you can't sell that many dishes. But if it goes out, bang, right away. So the crispy duck is fantastic because number one, you marinate it, you steam it, it's already cooked. What do you have to do? Just fry the bloody thing. Then it's crispy, which everybody loves. Then you serve it with pancake, which is fun. And, spring onions and cucumber and the sauce. What happens is people make sort of a joy out of going out to eat crispy duck, and at the same time, it's fun. So you have that, and it's also good because it's something that people wouldn't normally cook at home. In other words, a lot of people wouldn't make duck because it's too complicated. And the great thing about the crispy duck, because it's been steamed and cooked, all the fat is gone. So it's not fatty. Wow, that's a winner. See, that's a real winner. The only place I've ever found that in China is in Sichuan, which is on the west side in a very spicy area. And I got to tell you something, this will make you really laugh. It's becoming in again everywhere outside of the UK. In other words, here, for instance, in Bangkok, they're selling crispy duck. It's like,
Really?
the success of it in the UK has traveled that people want crispy duck.
So it's gone full circle.
Yeah, it's full circle. I think it's just so funny. And they're serving it in Hong Kong, which, I mean, I'm Cantonese, and we never heard of such a thing ever when I was growing up. I said, what's going on? I love it.
It is true about how the crispiness, like especially with like fried coated products, because I don't know if you know this, you may, but a secret ingredient for a lot of Chinese takeaways or restaurants is custard powder. Have you heard that one?
Yes, I know.
I did some development work for a Chinese group, and they showed me, and I was just like, I was baffled. I was like, why are you using this? And they were like, oh, because it's very crispy. And I was like, but surely it tastes of custard or vanilla. He goes, no, not really. And they'll use it on chicken wings. And I basically then just redid it and took out the colouring and the sugar, obviously. And it was basically the starch. It was the starch content.
Yes, absolutely.
But it just shows how they may not have been, and not to denigrate them, but they probably weren't food technologists. They weren't educated, but they figured out that something works.
But it's interesting because it's also adaptation to your environment. In other words, what we would use in China, we would use potato starch. We would use starch from water chestnuts,
Yeah.
which is slightly sweet, that kind of starch. And of course, you couldn't find it in the West before. So I think what the Chinese have done has been fantastic, is how they've been able to adapt. When you can't find something, you adapt. Give you a good example, asparagus. I mean, Chinese don't know asparagus. It's not something that grows in China. But guess what? In my uncle's restaurant in Chicago, we served it because it was cheap. People loved it. They knew it. And it was crunchy. It was wonderful. And especially when it was in season, it was good food costs. And we used it. And if it's good, why not? Even if you don't know it, and there are things that just were not available outside of China. And the great success of the Chinese all over the world in Chinese restaurant is their ability to adapt. It's been quite amazing without sort of compromising what Chinese food is about. In other words, if I have asparagus stir-fried really well, we don't have it in China, but so what? It's properly stir-fried. It has that, what we call the flavor of the wok, smoky and grilled. And because the wok's been hot enough, we use all the right techniques. And so if you know how to do that, then you can adapt. And let me tell you, I'm very good at that. For example, if I'm somewhere, like for instance, I always remember going to Morocco and going through the markets. I was going to cook a Chinese meal. Can you imagine? We're talking about, you definitely were not born yet, in the early 70s. I'm going to cook a Chinese meal. There's nothing to be. Well, you know what happens? You adapt. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was able to go to them. What I really wanted was fresh ingredients, stuff that was good. And then I knew the techniques. So I said, my ability is to turn something that I didn't know what I was going to get. And it's funny because I do this work for this charity where I cook for the homeless, but I can't make a menu because I don't know what I'm going to cook. Because when I arrive, it's all the leftovers from the supermarkets that they don't pass their sell by date, or they don't want to serve it anymore. They can't sell it, which is really crazy. But I love that. I love that challenge. Okay, I see what's there. Okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to do this, this, this. I know right away. And I think that that comes from also long time in cooking. I mean, over 60 years, but also adaptation. Okay, I don't have this, but I have that.
Yeah.
As long as I have seasoning, I can do everything. But the object is to make it taste good.
Yeah. So it's less important on what you have in front of you, but then you understand what goes with it, your staple ingredients. Let's say your sesame oil, your the way you're frying it, this everything. Just how to put it together.
Absolutely. That's what chefs need to understand. I taught professional chefs for many years as well. What you have to do is you have to learn two things: the basic techniques. There are things you do and things you don't. And then you have to learn about flavors and tastes, and to rely on your nose, your palate. People say to me, "Oh, this is past the sell by date." Well, just open it and smell it, right? If it doesn't smell right, then check it out. But most of the time, food technology is so good today, really. I mean, there are very few things that will even make you sick. You're in food technology. You agree with me?
Yes.
Yeah, very few things that will make you sick. And it pains me to see, I mean, the food wastage, especially in the UK, it's appalling. I mean, almost half of the food goes in the bin. It's unconscionable, especially in today's world.
And the problem is, a lot of people, for the most part, want to do the right thing, but they follow that best before date,
I know.
and they think, well, wait, it must mean something. Eggs is a typical example. Eggs don't go out of date on the day they say they do.
Never.
And there's a very quick way of checking if eggs are out of date. You put it in a jug of water and it floats up. And yet, many people would just look at that and be like, oh, they're no good. They've got to go in the bin.
Exactly.
Flour, we sell a lot of flour. We get some customers that they might get a bag that's on a crossover sometimes, or the wholesaler had it a bit too long, and they'll say, oh, it's gone out of date. So I'm going to put 16 kilos of it, because they're big bags. I'm going to put 16 kilos in the bin. I'm like, no, it's fine. Trust me. Like, it is fine.
Right, you can smell it. I know flour because you can smell it.
Yeah.
And I said, use your senses. Before they had all the sell by date thing, right? I remember you use your nose as your guide. And usually, I mean, we're creatures.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right? And that's how, I mean, I've had dogs and cats for years, and I love the way they use their nose as their guide. They know when something is not good.
Yeah.
But that's how you protect yourself.
I agree massively. So, talking about ingredients, there's one ingredient in the UK. Well, it's a Chinese ingredient, monosodium glutamate, MSG. I know you're not a fan. I've done my research.
I tell you why, because I'm one of those. A lot of Chinese are allergic to it as well.
Really?
And what I mean by that is when something has monosodium glutamate, I get extremely thirsty, sometimes headache, and I just have a overreaction to it. It's funny because it was invented by the Japanese.
Yeah, it was.
Ajinomoto in
that's
1906.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a flavor enhancer. But I find that it makes things a bit too salty for my palate. And you probably agree with me, if you have good ingredients, you actually don't need it. And I notice that more and more restaurants say we don't use MSG. You know what MSG used to be is something to hide inferior ingredients.
Yeah.
And it's very, very bad. And I think Chinese restaurants at last acquired a very sort of bad reputation for it. But I don't think a lot of people realize that MSG is used all the time. It's in crisp. It's
Yeah.
in lots of food products. I always ask people to look at what they're buying. I always look in the back. I know it's written so small that you can't see it, but look on the back and you see some of the things. You go, if you don't understand what it is, don't buy it.
I come from a different place because I respect the use of MSG. And I tell you where I come from. So I think if you use it correctly, it has a very good function. You know, we will use it in, for example, in very small quantities, 0.5%, you know, to clarify something, not as an enhancer, to
Right.
fuse everything together. So if you're using, let's see, chili, curry powder, garlic powder, rather than all of those components tasting separate, a little bit of that MSG at 0.4, 0.3%, it just ties them all together, brings it together. However, I think that there is a misuse of it. I know people that put, 4 tablespoons in something, and you think, well, and I don't see the benefit there. And that's where I probably think
Right.
some people get headaches and they're dehydrated because ultimately it's a sodium. So, but are
Mm.
you okay with naturally formed glutamatic acid?
Of course, I am. Yeah, and actually, that is a natural forming monosodium glutamate, and it's just that how the Japanese have synthesized it
Yeah.
into like salt. I'm for anything that occurs sort of naturally, and I agree with you. I think there's like abuse of, for instance, sugar.
Big time.
I know people say, sugar's a poison, and it's poisoning all of us. We don't need extra sugar, but it's a natural forming element in good fruit. I mean, a good ripe fruit should be very sweet. See, it's added sugar that's the problem, and people adding sugar to things. And I think you're right. It's probably about quantity and usage and using your common sense.
It's weird because we live in a world where something like marijuana is frowned upon, but sugar's
Yeah.
okay. Sugar's okay. Like we've got type 2 diabetes going through the roof, but that's okay.
Well, I have used it in the past, but I'm never addicted to it. I was never addicted. When I didn't smoke a joint, I didn't care. But I know that people are addicted to sugar. It's amazing. It's really, really bad for you. And I think it's very interesting to see in my lifetime how things like marijuana, cannabis, is now used in the medical profession.
Yeah.
And I think that's fantastic.
Mhm.
Things have come around full circle.
It's the same as mushrooms and LSD and psilocybin. That was all looked down upon at the time. Oh, it's drugs. But now look, they're using it for mental health.
Yeah, it depends on who's using it,
Yeah.
how it's being used. And like everything, I don't understand why cannabis shouldn't be regulated like tobacco. I mean, talking about things that are bad for you. I don't know if you smoke or not, but
No, I don't
smoking
know.
tobacco, yeah, is very, very bad. I mean, but they've known about that for such a long time and they hid it. And you're talking about, I mean, cannabis or anything else. I mean, that is really bad for you. And people get addicted. I mean, it's terrible, especially when I see, I have women friends that have had breast cancer. And when I see young girls smoking a cigarette, I just want to literally say, don't do that. I want to pull it away from you're endangering your health. It's painful to me to watch young people puffing away, knowing what the consequences will be for them.
It's amazing that we still see people today smoke. Even younger people, new people and that sort of tells you that the government's failed miserably in some ways, if they even tried. My dad smokes on a good day 40 to 50 a day. And I'll say to him,
Wow.
and he goes, "Oh, I've cut down a bit." And I was like, "Where from?" He goes, "Well, I used to go through 3 packets a day." And I was like, and you can't comprehend. And I think him smoking so much has had one benefit, and that's the fact that none of his kids smoke. None of them.
Well, you know what is surprising? It's not only addictive because of the smoking, but also the chemicals they put in it.
keep you coming back?
Oh, wow. When I discovered that, I said, this is outrageous. It's almost criminal, endangering people's health. And that's one of my pet peeves.
Oh, well, I thought you were telling me off when you thought I said I smoked. I saw you like,
No.
thought,
No, no, no. It's not their fault because once they're addicted to it, it's not that easy. You know what somebody said? It was a BBC program, a Panorama. They were saying that it was easier almost for people to quit heroin than to quit sugar and tobacco. I was pretty shocked when I saw that because it was a whole program about the dangers of sugar. And it was quite a revelation for me. It's very interesting because one of the reasons I think I'm in my 70s now, but I think one of the reasons I've been able to keep my weight down is I'm not addicted to sweet things. In other words, something sugary is the worst thing in the world because being Chinese, I did not grow up with candies and cakes and things like that. And in fact, I'm sort of physically don't like it. But I love good fruit. For instance, something that cherries or strawberries that are fresh in season, sweet. That I love. I love the flavor of fresh fruit.
you like naturally sweet foods, naturally, yeah.
Exactly. And it's like everything. Don't overdo it. That's all. But I think that's sugar that is good. See, for instance, I mean, there's lots of things that in my generation, illness people would have. I have other problems. Nobody lives forever. But there's lots of things I circumvent because of not having an addiction to sugar.
It's not a bad thing. It's not,
Yeah. My problem is I like salty things. So we Chinese have a hypertension, and I have a hypertension problem. And I do, so I have to cut down on my salt.
yeah.
But so I make it up with chilies.
Yeah, I love chilies. Pretty obsessed with chilies. I think for me, I just don't like sweet foods really. I try and avert them all the time. And I think my addiction is probably like fried things like chips and all of that. So I have to stay away
Me
from
too.
that. Yeah. So I have it every now and then in moderation.
Yes, of course. Moderation.
Yeah. I'm in and out of fish and chip businesses daily. I'd be the size of a house if I ate every single one.
Yeah. You look pretty in shape.
Well, maybe you should get your eyes checked as well, Ken. No, I could definitely do with a bit of exercise for definite. What one thing that we've sort of discussed, but I think I've got your view on it, is that you think that culture sort of flows. You mentioned how crispy duck has now made its way into other countries like Thailand. It came from the UK and it's gone to sort of Thailand and China. I've always thought that Chinese food and Italian food is probably the most, I use the word adulterated, but what you're suggesting is you're sort of suggesting that no, they've just gone to that country and they make do with what they've got, and it's become English Italian or Italian American or Italian Chinese. Sorry, not Italian Chinese, because that would be funny. But it's almost like the main thing becomes part of the culture it's in. So, what's your thoughts on culture appropriation? Can anybody say, you know what, I'm opening a Chinese restaurant? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think so many people spend time on things like that. You know what our world shows now? Globalization of many things. I'm just thinking about the first time I came to the UK 50 years ago. It was a big thing. I came as a student. Everything was I remember coming to London, how everything was English. And, times have changed. We all travel now. I mean, well, after this pandemic, we travel, we get on a plane as we get on a train. And also, too, it's not only globalization of travel, but it's interchange of culture, of chefs. I love it when these chefs are going to other countries to eat and to learn about, for instance, Moroccan cooking, and they come back all charged up. I remember when I went to Vietnam. Oh, wow. I always love Vietnamese food, but to see it in Vietnam, I mean, I learned a lot. But that doesn't mean I can't incorporate what I've learned. It's not appropriating their culture. What I'm doing is I'm learning from their culture and I'm doing something different. At the end of the day, we're all one world. And by seeing that when we share each other's food and culture and we travel, it makes us less, I think, in the corner of our world. And also, I think that has a lot of great effect that will help us because for climate change, we're in this world together. And, I'm in my 70s, but, it's for the future, the children. This is going to be their world. And we can't leave them a screwed up world. We need to clean up our mess, a lot of things that we do, and we need to learn about food. But it's okay to exchange things, to exchange ideas, to exchange taste, food. I mean, what is authentic? I mean, really, when you see how China has changed so much, it's amazing. I remember when I went in the early 80s, 83, the first time I went to China, my God, I thought I was stepping into a medieval movie.
Wow.
China was so poor. The cooking was so bad. Why? Because they didn't have the ingredients. They didn't care anymore. They just want to have enough food to eat. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now you go to China. Wow, the food will knock your socks off. Why? It's because they caught up with the rest of the world. And they're learning. They're Michelin star chefs. They're taking Chinese food now to another level, which is good. Is that authentic? Well, if he's a good chef, it's authentic. You know what's not authentic is bad food.
Yeah.
That's not authentic. And if somebody cooks from their heart, their palate, that's where it's at. To me, I just want somebody to make great food.
Yeah.
You eat it and you say, wow, I love that food.
I think, in my view, from like if we're developing a product, if someone puts the word authentic on a package, that usually means it's not authentic. Like, I'm not denigrating anybody. It's just that, if it was that good,
Yeah, I agree with you.
you wouldn't have to say those words. I was at a friend's yesterday and he showed me all these pastes that he's bought. And Indian pastes, and he said, "Look, I went to the Indian shop and I bought them." He goes, "Oh, I don't buy none of those branded ones." Yeah, I don't want to say their names; it's not fair, because I don't want to buy one of those branded ones. And he was just like, "Oh, they're a load of whatever." And it was just interesting that it had a worse label. The jar was ugly, but the product inside looked really vivid and rich. And if I ever, if you want to lose me for a day, just take me to Wing It. Just take me there and leave me, because I can just walk around the aisles. I don't know half the ingredients. I recognize some.
I'll take you there. I'll explain it to you.
Lots of people would love to lose me. So yeah, you can take me there. So but it's just, I remember once me and the wife went, because there's one in Birmingham and it's not so far from us. And
Yes.
went there. We bought some Chinese sausages. Yeah. Had no idea what to even do with them. Like, because, and you just think, but I would just buy things. And my father-in-law goes there to buy octopus, because Cypriots love octopus and so do Chinese.
Yes.
So it's just that for me, I don't think anyone owns a culture. I think culture,
No.
it spreads like art, doesn't it? Almost,
It belongs to everyone. And the more we share of it, the more we can learn from each other. And you know how wonderful it is, for instance, to use Chinese sausage. By the way, it's great steam with rice. That's all. Yeah, that's all. It's so good, and it's something I grew up with. And it is funny. It's like food transports you. For instance, if I have Chinese sausage and rice, and then I would do a fried egg drizzle with oyster sauce, it reminds me of my mom. See, that's what my mom used to make, because it was easy, it was quick. And it's funny how food, as you're talking about your heritage, how it brings you back to times and how you grew up. Like children, if they eat something great made, like even a sandwich, oh, they remember that. They said, my mom used to make that, and that reminds me of my mom. And it's the same thing for me. And it's funny how certain food, I remember fish and chips because it was the first time I went to the UK. I said, "Wow, this is." It was at a Chinese restaurant that I had it.
Oh
I said,
God.
"This is not Chinese. This is a cultural appropriation." But it was great. They made it in a wok.
Fish and chips is the most non-British British food. They say that it was brought over in the 1800s, or at least made by Portuguese Jews. And now, if you look, we've got Indians making it, Chinese making it, English people making it.
Apparently, it's a Jewish.
Yeah,
A lot of the Jewish traders. I read the history of the
yeah.
fish and chips. I was amazed.
It's very multicultural. But everyone just
I
sees
love it.
just fish and chips.
It reflects the UK.
It does, exactly. No, it so does. And I think I always think of that when everyone tells me how racist England is. Don't get me wrong.
No.
There is the odd person who is a racist, but that exists everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. But the richness,
Mm,
right? The richness of the UK, to me, I've been everywhere in the UK. The richness of the UK is that it is multicultural.
Yeah.
That you can not only find food, just look on your supermarket shelves. I remember when I did my first series for the BBC in the early 80s, I said you would have to substitute this and that. You don't have to do that these days. You can go to the ordinary supermarket and get all these authentic, like Chinese sauces and everything. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
The richness, it makes life in the UK exciting for everybody.
yeah. No, it's so true. It's so true. It's like, how boring would it be if,
Yeah.
it's a funny story, actually. Again, some English people, like anything, I guess, they stick to very traditional food, as you'd imagine. And
Comfort food.
yeah, but my wife's friend is from Hong Kong. She cooked
Yeah.
chicken for her British in-laws, and she just sprinkled some thyme on it. And her British in-laws said, "Oh, it's really nice. Is it Chinese?" And it was just thyme. And it was just like, and when Miria told me, I was just laughing, because I think some people just they're not adventurous at all. But that doesn't mean that, like you said earlier about soup, doesn't mean they don't appreciate nice food. It just means they like different food. But I think now, like, Britain's come along so much that there's so many people that don't see Chinese food as foreign. They don't see Indian food as foreign. It's just a different cuisine. And I think that's a real big milestone, isn't it?
Yeah, don't you think it's also a generational gap? In other words, people, I'm talking about in my generation before, they weren't exposed to things because you couldn't travel, for instance, to China, for instance. It was quite limited where you could go, let alone try Chinese food. And so you ate what you knew, it's comfort food. And now we're seeing generations of young people, I know, that they want different food. They tasted it when they were young. And they're the ones that are fueling all this demand. And sometimes they bring along their parents.
Yeah, no, it's true.
So
True.
I see everything as positive, changing for the better.
Yeah, I massively agree. Massively agree. When I'm still reading your book, actually, My Stir Fried Life. And what do you think it is about your upbringing that made you so driven, such a hard worker? You're 70 something years old, you're still working. You're not in a restaurant, but you're still working. So what is
Well, a little bit, mostly for charities. But I think, number one, growing up super poor
Yeah.
is a powerful incentive. I remember when I started working for my uncle at age 11, and he handed me the envelope of money. Wow, you're making your own money. It's quite empowering to be on your own, in other words. And I've always worked, but it's not satisfaction. It's being proud that that you're rewarded for your work. And that's why it brings me to another point about my Chineseness. It's about what I've been taught by my mom. is to give back. And that's what most of the work I am doing now, lots of it is for charity, helping to raise money for Action Against Hunger, for different types of charities, for children, for the homeless. I mean, these things are really important because I've been so lucky that I've had a wonderful career. I've been able to travel, experience different things. I've had a pretty fantastic, wonderful life. And I'm grateful for that. And I want to give back in all the ways I can to those who haven't had the chance that I did. And whatever we could do to help, especially people like us who are in food, we need to, there should be no hunger in the world. I mean, that one person should be hungry anywhere is unconscionable. And I'm fighting that whatever I can with all the weapon that is, even with my walk.
Well, that can do some damage, I bet. So one quote that I really sort of appreciated in the book was, you can't just sit on your ass and expect things to come. I don't care how talented you are. You've just got to go out there and work hard for it. And I just thought that's something we don't hear a lot of today.
Yes.
You know,
It's not easy. You have to work hard for it. Even if you want to cook, as I told you, you have to cook it again and again and again, so that it's funny, you're learning every single day. And that's what I love about life. Even when I've cooked something, God knows for how many years, and then something happens and I said, wow, what's going on here? Then you learn something new. How fantastic is that? And that's what I want to teach people. You got to work hard. Hard work is good. It never hurt anybody.
no.
And it makes you actually appreciate the rewards that come later when you work hard. Because, you know, that's why, for instance, I don't believe in giving big inheritance to your children. I give them a small amount. They can maybe give them a start, but you have to work hard for it. And I've seen people who have spoiled their children, and it's actually in some ways ruined their life because they don't have any incentive, and it's sad. I've seen young people going into drugs. It's because they're looking for something. You know, there's something about working. It's fantastic. You know, hard work never hurts anybody.
No, I agree.
It's laziness that hurts. It's laziness that hurts.
See, I'm a strong believer that people grow when there's hardship and stress. In those moments, you grow. Something happens, you know, and
Yes.
you know, it's, think of when you were younger and maybe you were doing exams, and when you're stressed and upset and tired, all of that information somehow just sinks in, you know. And I think you're right.
Let me give you a good example. When I was young, well, of course, I didn't have money, so a lot of money, so I didn't have a car, so I never learned how to drive. And then for many years, I got around by bicycle. And then when I was doing well, it was too late to learn how to drive. Also, too, I'd rather spend my money on something else than buying a car. A car is worse than having a partner. It costs more.
But I guess you've waited long enough now. You can use a limousine or Uber.
You know, but so let somebody else drive. Yeah, exactly. And so it's wonderful. I love it. I'm so glad I don't know how to drive.
In your book, when you said, "Oh, no one needs another bad Chinese driver on the road," and I thought to myself, Chinese and Cypriots must be related because we're terrible drivers too.
It was always a standing joke. Oh my God, another Chinese driver.
So, to finish off, one thing that I really wanted to sort of ask you is, a few years ago, you were diagnosed with cancer, and you look okay to me.
Yeah.
I hope you're okay.
It was over 10 years ago, right? And it was an interesting, I mean, moment because I was more than 10 years younger. But it made me feel about how short life is. But I took the thing. I went to Japan to get a treatment for it. And guess what? I spent 2 months in the most wonderful, I mean, in Japan. because it took 37 treatments. And I was able to enjoy Japanese food of all kinds. I became addicted to sake, food I love. And I discovered Japanese whiskey. Oh my God, it's going to bankrupt me. And I had a friend said, Ken, I said, you must be one of the people that know how to make cancer treatment glamorous. You had such a good time. I figure if I'm going to go, I'm going to have a good time going out.
Did it change your outlook? Did it make you say, you know what, I'm going to slow down and switch more to charity work? Or is it just, you know what, in the moment, you just do what you do?
No. I just continue to do what I did.
A Japanese whiskey.
And you know what my philosophy is? You come into this world with nothing. And guess what? You're going to leave with nothing.
Yeah.
So make the best of it.
Yeah. So true.
So every single moment, I figure, okay, I enjoy working to help other people. There are some things I basically like life, but I know what the end game is.
Yeah.
So I think if you accept that, everything else is easy. We're all not going to be here for a long time, but I hope that my legacy will be about inspiring people to help other people.
Yeah.
Because we're all in this together and we all need to help each other in lots of ways.
Yeah. I know. I think you're completely right. And what's that old saying? No one's getting out of here alive. So
not that I know of. You can go to the moon, but you can't.
No, exactly. But no, Ken, I just want to thank you for your time, and you've just ended it perfectly. And just thank you so much for your time.
It's been a great pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine.
Thanks to Ken for joining me on the Sarah's podcast. He impressed me with his humility. He was relaxed and chilled and gave me all the time in the world. In my view, an absolute gentleman. If you want to follow Ken, just jump over to Twitter or Facebook, but I'll also link to Ken's social media in the show notes. I know you're all busy, but please take a second to click and share on all of our social media feeds when you cross them. It really helps others find us. If you like this episode, then chances are others you know may like it too. I always want to hear your feedback, so email me anytime on stelios@theworldofsarahs.com. And a big shout out to our episode sponsor, Bizimply. Visit bizimply.com today to reduce your staffing headaches, take the hard work out of rota planning and employee HR tracking. Remember, bizimply.com. The Sarah's podcast is brought to you by Sarah's Pure Food Innovation.